Jake, this week has been really tough for me. I'm exhausted from work, and I just don't want to spend the upcoming weekend in the village with your parents, Charlotte confessed, her voice sincere. Jake looked up from the TV, astonished. What am I supposed to tell Mom? It's cherry-picking season, and it's hard work for her. She already has so much on her plate. Charlotte let out a heavy sigh. They had been married for about a year, and when their relationship began, she never imagined that they would face issues like this. Jake had approached her on the street. At first, she was taken aback, but he was so charming and spontaneous that she ended up giving him her number. They met again soon after, and just a couple of months later, he proposed. At 24, Charlotte was a sought-after bride, a slender, attractive brunette who owned a 3-room apartment in the capital. She had inherited the place from her grandmother and renovated it at her own expense. A university Chinese teacher, she was well respected in her field. In contrast, Jake had lived with his parents in the village his entire life, only recently moving to the capital to work at a construction site. He was renting a small room in a dormitory when he quickly moved in with Charlotte. "Are you sure you can build a future with him?" her mother had asked gently. "He's from the village, and you come from a big city. Your views on life are likely very different." "Oh, Mom, that's just an outdated stereotype," she waved off. "Jake is just like me. Just because he grew up in the village doesn't mean he's not resourceful." "But what about his education? Will he always just scrape by with odd jobs?" her mother pressed. "He plans to enroll in a correspondence course at a construction institute next year. I encouraged him. He's determined to improve himself for our future family," Charlotte reassured her. A month after that conversation, the couple signed their marriage certificate, opting out of a grand wedding. Initially, their life together was going well, but the first signs of trouble appeared when their in-laws visited. Jake took his parents to shopping malls, cafes, and parks, and they marveled at the city's offerings. "Yes, life in a big city isn't cheap," Valentina sighed at dinner, her husband, Oliver, nodding in agreement. "That's true," Charlotte said, slicing a pie she had prepared for the guests. "Housing prices are particularly shocking, but there's nothing we can do about it." "How much do they rent out apartments like yours for?" her father-in-law suddenly inquired. Taken aback, Charlotte quickly realized he meant her apartment. After mentioning the approximate rent, a stunned silence fell over the kitchen. A couple of days later, as their guests were preparing to leave, Jake's parents invited the young couple to the village. "I'm sure I'll enjoy it there," Charlotte said to her husband, "but I hear the toilet's outside and there's nowhere to go." "And where would you want to go?" Jake replied, puzzled. "You'll just have time to work there." "So they expect us to work?" Charlotte chuckled, confused. "We spent the winter relaxing. Now it's time to lend a hand. These are my parents. Do you want them to do all the hard work while we enjoy their jams and pickles? If I remember correctly, you loved Mom's apple jam, and it takes a lot of effort to make that." This marked the first serious argument between the newlyweds. Charlotte couldn't believe her ears. Was Jake really accusing her of enjoying his mother's jam? "I don't want your parents to work themselves to the bone, and I can just buy some jam," she replied. Jake waved his hand dismissively. "You can't buy that." Charlotte chose not to push the issue, and from that point on, they found themselves in the village every weekend. When they arrived for the first time, tired from the 2-hour journey, Charlotte hoped to catch her breath, but Valentina had other plans. As soon as they stepped into the yard, she announced, "Oh, you've arrived. We could have been here earlier, but let's not dwell on that. Charlotte, there's a house dress on that chair. Change quickly. We need to sow carrots and beets. Can you handle that?" "No," Charlotte admitted. "I grew up in the city. Just as I thought. It doesn't take much to figure that out. Get dressed and follow me." "Where's your father?" Jake asked curiously. "He went fishing, not far from here, down by the masonry. Change your clothes and join him. He brought a fishing rod for you," Valentina smiled. The news that her husband was going fishing made Charlotte feel disheartened. "Jake, I want to go with you," she whispered as soon as they entered the house. "I'm tired from the trip, and I'd love to sit by the river for an hour before helping your mom." "So you want to rest while mom works hard? I didn't expect that from you. Please don't embarrass me in front of my parents," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Jake, you haven't worked in 2 weeks, and I've been at the university from morning to night, with classes in the evenings. I need a break too," she tried to reason with him. "If anyone's tired, it's mom. She's in the garden from dawn until dusk, then takes care of the chickens. And learning Chinese and chatting all day isn't exactly exhausting," Jake replied, looking smug. Charlotte felt a surge of indignation but bit her tongue. She wanted to point out that he had been living off her chatter for quite some time now. Lately, it seemed like he was in no rush to find another part-time job. "Why don't you help your mom too, and then we can go to the river together?" she suggested, genuinely puzzled. "Because it's not a man's job to dig in the garden. Besides, you'll probably need to help mom with lunch later," he snapped before disappearing through the gate. After changing, Charlotte headed to the garden, where she spent the next few hours working. It felt like Valentina had forgotten all about lunch, but at noon, she brushed off her apron and said, "Well, the soup won't cook itself, and the potatoes won't fry. Let's head to the kitchen. The guys will be back soon, and will want lunch." "I'm hungry too," Charlotte admitted, her voice weary. "Let's cook, then you can eat," Valentina replied before heading into the house. The pattern continued in the following months. Jake still worked part-time at a construction site, and on weekends, the couple took the train to the village to visit his parents. Gradually, Charlotte found herself forgetting about meeting friends, getting manicures, and the little pleasures that once filled her life. Yet, she didn't want to jeopardize her marriage. She believed in the importance of a lifelong commitment and felt she should do everything to preserve it. "Don't you want to spend the weekend in the city?" she asked Jake. "There's a new exhibition, and we haven't been to the movies or visited my mom in ages. It's always the village." "Thanks, but I get enough of the city during the week. It drives me crazy. I want peace and quiet, fishing, away from the hustle and bustle," Jake declared. "Sure, you really do need that break. Your parents don't ask for anything. Valentina even chops wood while you and your dad fish. But I don't want to become like that. If we're helping out, let's do it together. And if we're resting, then I want to rest too," she pleaded desperately. "Are you criticizing my mother for caring for her family? All the women in our family have done that. There are no selfish people in sight," Jake retorted, his voice laced with annoyance. Once again, sitting in a crowded train, Charlotte glanced at Jake, engrossed in a magazine, and wondered how they ended up married. Yes, he was undeniably handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, blue-eyed, and with regular features that she admired. But what did they really have in common? "He doesn't love me at all," Charlotte thought bitterly, turning her gaze to the window. For the next week, she mulled over this conclusion and finally decided to tell Jake that she would be spending the weekend at home. He tried to persuade her with talk of the urgent cherry season that needed harvesting, but Charlotte stood her ground. The tension between them hung heavily in the air all evening, and the next morning, Jake left for the village alone, slamming the door behind him. In the first few moments after he left, Charlotte hesitated. Should she run after him? She could still catch the train. But ultimately, she admitted to herself that she didn't want to chase after him. She had been craving a proper rest for days, and now she finally had the chance. She spent Saturday doing exactly what she wanted, visiting a beautician and getting her nails done, then having a delicious dinner at her favorite cafe with her mother. By the time Jake returned from the village that evening, she felt rejuvenated. "We're moving to the village to live with my parents. No discussion," he declared as soon as he stepped into the kitchen. Charlotte, pulling a baking sheet of chicken from the oven, turned around in shock. "Why's that?" "My parents aren't getting any younger. It's becoming difficult for them to tend to the garden, and Mom needs help. There's plenty of room for everyone in the house, Jake replied, sitting down on a stool with his arms crossed. But I have a job here, she reminded him. You'll have to leave your job. Nobody needs your Chinese in the village. Mom has already made arrangements. There's a spot for you on the farm. I'll be working there too. It's not too demanding. You'll be home by lunchtime. Are you serious? Absolutely. If you don't want to go to the farm, that's fine. Mom still needs help. Besides, we'll manage. The rent from this apartment is more than enough for us all to live on. You want to rent out my apartment? We're husband and wife, which means the apartment is ours, not just yours, Jake said, looking at her with surprise. Charlotte raised her eyebrows, eyeing him curiously. You're not joking, are you? He nodded, albeit uncertainly. Listen, Jake, the apartment isn't ours. It's mine from before we got married. I expect you to vacate it as soon as possible because I'm filing for divorce. You have a day to get ready. This will go quickly since there's nothing to divide, Charlotte said firmly. So that's it? I'll pack my things right now. You'll come running back, but I don't want you. Mom is right. You're too homely for someone like me. I'll find someone better. Moments later, Jake re-entered the kitchen, where Charlotte had remained, and tossed the apartment keys onto the table. A few seconds later, the front door slammed shut behind him. Walking to the window, Charlotte saw Jake loading his bags into his friend's car. Well, that's for the best, she whispered, feeling indifferent as she pulled the curtains closed.